Pollinators are essential to all ecosystem survival, and without them, the human race and much terrestrial life would not survive. All of the world's seed plants need to be pollinated. Pollinators take pollen from one flower and drop it onto another, helping plants reproduce. This process helps the plants produce seeds and fruit. When these seeds get transported to the other plants, this increases the number of plants of a particular species and helps them maintain genetic diversity. The most essential pollinators in the North Carolina area are wild and managed honeybees, bumblebees, and butterflies. Loss of pollinators would also devastate many economies. More than 150 food crops in the U.S. depend on the role pollinators play, including almost all fruit and grain crops. Insect pollinators live in various ecosystems throughout the nation. Here in Asheville, native bees have adapted to withstand the high altitudes and cold temperatures of the mountains.
So you have to begin with this idea that this is a relationship. So in some ways, the mountain ecology is going to be somewhat different from a, say, Piedmont ecology or a coastal plains ecology, just to think of North Carolina. And that these different ecologies will have different plants. And they will then be conducive to different kinds of pollinators depending upon the plants that are there. And the mountains are famous for, among the honeybees anyway, of having sourwood honey. And so our forests have a lot of sourwood trees, but other forests have sourwood trees too. But because at higher elevation, it seems the sourwood tree produces more nectar and therefore more honey. So that's a particularly small example of how in ecology, a mountain ecology might produce a certain kind of relationship with the honeybee that you might not get in other parts of North Carolina or South Carolina.
Here, pollinators find shelter in trees and burrows, find food in the diverse vegetation and wildlife, and drink from the various bodies of water which hydrate the plants and animals in the ecosystem. Given the necessities they provide, these habitats are crucial to the preservation of the pollinator population. Yet, human influence has thoroughly altered these green spaces.
Because the obvious one that we can think of is pesticides. You know, that people are, I have neighbors that sometimes want to get rid of their mosquitoes, and so they fog their yards with mosquitoes. Well, if there are any honeybees in that yard, they may be affected by that pesticide. So there's a dynamic there around pesticides. Most of the honey that bees are collecting in the mountains is coming from trees rather than from field crops. And so that's another thing, is that the trees around here, and there's so much forest around here, that there's lots of resources for pollinators, or for bees anyway, and people aren't generally spraying their trees. What's a bigger issue right now is the varroa mite. It attaches itself to bee larvae and also to honeybees. And when it does that, it's basically sucking their blood. To the extent that they have blood, it's sucking their inner juices. And it's also transmitting viruses and diseases. So that's a big threat to honeybees nationally right now.
Global warming due to fossil fuels have made green spaces too hot for pollinators and vegetation to thrive, as well as increased precipitation. The expansion of urban spaces has uprooted land and destroyed pollinators' means of food and shelter, and pesticides have poisoned the plants they pollinate, making the environment essentially uninhabitable. With these essential ecosystems under threat, so too are the pollinators that inhabit them. The biggest threat to most pollinators is habitat loss. Pollinators need plenty of uninterrupted open space to forage effectively. Habitat destruction and fragmentation are leading causes of pollinator decline. While the effects of habitat destruction are somewhat obvious, habitat fragmentation can be just as bad.
With flying insects, they can theoretically cross a road, although a big interstate might be a barrier. They wouldn't maybe do that. or it might expose them to other things like carcinogens or whatever that is in the air. But still, I think where I would imagine the barriers might be is that the fragmentation would be is you have patches of different kinds of crops that are cut off from other kinds of crops or other kinds of plants, and that they're far enough apart that the bees or the butterflies can't get there.
When pollinators have to cross dangerous areas to find places to forage, they can easily die or get lost. In Appalachia, kudzu can also pose an enormous problem to pollinator habitats. It does much more than simply take over large areas of land. Kudzu bugs decimate soybean crops, which are a vital foraging resource for bees in the western North Carolina region. In order to protect these crops from kudzu bugs and other invasive pests, farmers often turn to pesticides. One of the more common groups is called neonics, which are supposed to be non-lethal to bees. While they do not kill bees outright, they cause many harmful side effects like nutritional issues, reduced foraging, poor immunity, smaller brood size, and failure to build nests. Neonics can also linger in the environment for over 2 years and spread over massive areas through water or dust.
I guess that the trick is, and I can imagine, I tend to like the idea of organic farming and stuff like that. I have family members who are organic farmers, but I also see that if that meant that there were fewer resources, plant resources, so if you have pesticides to protect the plant, and then there were fewer plants because you're not using pesticides, then that might be a problem for some pollinators. There are bad pesticides that people use to get the mite, but there are better ones that are more organic materials that are not bad for the environment and not bad for the bees. If we stopped using those, then the varroa might increase, and that would be bad for the pollinator. So I can imagine scenarios in which pesticides are actually good for pollinators.
Bees specifically are also threatened by invasive species. While Asian giant hornets are not a current threat to native bee populations, they could become a massive danger if not carefully monitored and controlled. They are natural predators of bees, and American bees have no defense mechanisms against them. Worldwide bee populations are also being infected with foreign forms of Nosema parasites that they lack resistance to. All pollinators are also threatened by rising temperatures and increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. The disappearance of bees would cause a ripple effect that would devastate ecosystems worldwide. Bees play a crucial role in pollinating plants, which is vital for the production of food crops. The lack of bees also affects the natural balance of ecosystems, leading to the extinction of many species of plants and animals. Moreover, the absence of bees has a profound effect on the health of our planet and our ability to sustain ourselves. 17% of bee species have gone extinct, and 40% of bees worldwide are at risk of extinction. However, there are ways to prevent this scenario. One of the largest threats to pollinators is a lack of safe habitat where they can build homes and find a variety of nutritious food sources. By planting a bee garden, you can create a comfortable habitat with plants that are rich in pollen and nectar. You don't need much space for bee gardens. Another way to help pollinators in your local area is establishing bee baths. Pollinators work up quite a thirst collecting nectar. Seed sourcing is an effective way to keep pollinators safe. There are a variety of different plants that work well when it comes to providing either nectar, pollen, larval food, or a nice cozy habitat for them. Most of these plants include the sweet Joe Pye weed, mountain mints, red columbine, butterfly weeds, and soybeans. Raising awareness of native bee life cycles and habitat needs can greatly benefit honeybees. A good way to know what's going on in your city is to get involved with your local government so we can have a say in how farmers protect their vegetation. If farmers reduce mowing, include more flowering plants in field borders, cover crops, become more cautious in pesticide use, and avoid importing bees from outside of the state, bee populations will be at a significantly lower risk of decline.
But generally speaking, my general assumption is that pollinators are badly affected by pesticides, and if we eliminated them, the pollinators would probably thank us.